Hello, everyone. This is Adam Jardy from the Columbus Dispatch. Today is Friday, August 30th, 2024, and it's my official duty to welcome you into episode 424 of the Buckeye Extra Men's Basketball Podcast. Welcome to Jubilation City. Welcome to the Jardy House. I'm sitting here on a Friday morning. It's a big potential morning here, and we'll get to that in a moment. But big potential morning for me personally. Let's be clear with that. There's some big music news going on this week, and I'll get to that here at the end of the podcast. But I wanted to get you an extra one here before the end of the week because I was able to go to Ohio State this week and speak with the two newest members of the team. Spoke with Quez Glover and Ivan Njegovan, and you want to try to get the N sound when you pronounce his last name. It's going to take some time. I'm going to keep working at it. But I was able to go to Value City Arena on Wednesday, speak to both of them, and then watch a little bit of just some up and down team workout stuff that they were doing as the Buckeyes prepare for the season and are in the very early stages of what the fall looks like. So I mostly want to go over. I'm just very fascinated with adding two players to your rotation, to your roster so late in the calendar year. I think this is probably something we're going to see more and more of as we get closer and closer, or as we get further along, rather, in this new era of college basketball. But it's hard to think of a time where Ohio State has had two players that officially joined the team essentially in August who are expected to play this season and expected to have roles on the team. And so one of the things I was most curious about was where these guys came from and how they got to Ohio State, because there's two very different journeys. You have obviously Ivan coming from Croatia, and you have Quez Glover, who's been at multiple schools over the last several years. And so I've had a story go up on Ivan. It went up Friday morning at dispatch.com. I'm writing a story on Quez that will go up probably Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, so early September. But I wanted to just kind of share a couple of the thoughts that I had and some of the immediate takeaways from my interviews with both those guys. So that's going to be the majority here of this podcast. Before we get into all that, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you enjoy the finest of podcasts. I'm going to start working on potentially getting them on YouTube as well. So look for that if you enjoy looking at all this. If you subscribe, you'll automatically get the newest ones just as soon as our man Patrick Flaherty, the Podfather, can grab them and publish them. In this case, though, we got to give a shout out to Scott Kirk, who's stepping into the void as Patrick takes some vacation, and Scott will be handling this one. So shouts to Scott for the help. While you're subscribing or downloading, please leave a review. Please click 5 stars. And as always, please do consider telling a friend. Thanks to everyone who has taken the time to do all that. I really appreciate all the feedback, and it's a fun time because we are getting closer and closer to the start of the year, and the team's obviously on campus, and we got some stuff to talk about. So we'll start here with Ivan. And my first very off the top question was just, how did you get here? And his full answer, he said, last summer, I decided to stay in my club where I was for the past 3 years. I was in Zadar for a full season with the senior team, but it was tough. I didn't get much playing time, so I went on loan to another club in Croatia's first division. How the season was ending, I wasn't feeling good there. I didn't feel that was a place where I could really grow as a player, as a guy. So I started thinking about coming to college and starting to play college basketball. He said in the past he didn't think about going to college. That was not really something that was on his radar. He ended up having an agent that helped him sort through some of his options. He said there were several schools that he was looking at, but that once Ohio State started to make contact and started to recruit him, he said that it was when Ohio State came, I couldn't say no, was how he said. He said that's basically how I ended up at Ohio State. When I asked him about what was it about Ohio State, he said my first meeting with the coaches. Then he also said, when you see all the resources we have here, the gym, equipment, locker rooms, the campus, you really cannot compare it. I don't know if EuroLeague teams have resources like we do here. It's not that hard to choose this, to come here when you see all the things you have here and are able to do here. So this was a process that it sounds like really started in May, and he committed to Ohio State in May and was possibly going to join the team for the summer, but then ultimately was playing with his national team for June and July, essentially. So a decision was made then to enroll at the end of the summer. So he said he had about 20 days between when he finished with the national team and when he came to Ohio State. When I asked him about playing in Croatia and trying to get a feel for the level and trying to get a feel for what kind of players was he going against. He said on the senior team, uh, most guys 25 to 30, 35 were players that he was going against. He'll turn 20 next month. So he said, obviously there was, a learning curve, and there were some things that just he wasn't old enough to really be able to compete at maybe the level that he wanted to. He said the problem is young players don't really get much playing time, especially at bigger clubs. So he said, for my development, this was the right choice to come here. Um, while he was playing for Croatia in the U20 national or U20 European Championships, and I wrote about this when his signing was announced, he averaged 6.1 points, 6.6 rebounds in 7 games. He had 15 and 16 against Bulgaria in his last game. He said the biggest difference between going from the youth level to the senior level was that the physicality and the importance was really placed on playing defense. He said, coming to the senior team, I developed tactically. I started getting used to more physical basketball. I then asked him about, if it was a case of you're developing, you're getting better, but then you need to do some of that in games. And does that help lead to a decision like this? And he said, yeah. I can confirm, having seen him in person, he's a big dude. So he's listed at 7'1" on the team's official roster. They don't list a weight for him. I think he's at like 250, 260. Watching him in the gym, standing next to Aaron Bradshaw, who's also every bit of 7'1", Austin Parks looked like a power forward. Like it was kind of like when you would see the pictures last year of Zach Edey going against Zed Key, and Zed only comes up to like his chest. And yes, I know the debate. Zed wasn't tall enough to be a center in the Big Ten, blah blah blah. I get all that, but like Zed's still a big dude, and to be dwarfed by someone was a strange sight. And it felt the same looking at Yvonne and Aaron Bradshaw standing next to Austin Parks. It was kind of wild because Austin is every bit of 6'10", maybe 6'11", but these guys are even bigger. And the size, I think, could potentially help him, find more of a role in the Big Ten early on than maybe initially anticipated. I asked him about the level of competition and what he saw from the Big Ten from a physicality standpoint. And Yvonne said that he saw the teams here are filled with very big guys, strong guys. He said, I think that'll, with his height and his experience, he thinks it'll make it a little bit easier for him to adapt. I'm intrigued by his game because watching the little bit of practice that I got to watch, he was running up and down the court. He looked pretty quick for a big guy. I saw him hit some threes. It seems like every player on this team is going to be expected to be able to at least be passable as a three-point shooter. I also saw Austin Parks hit some threes, and I saw Aaron Bradshaw hit threes. Like, these guys are all shooting them, and they're going to be expected to at least make a couple of them. Certainly, there's going to be an acclimation process here for Yvonne. When I asked him about his game and kind of what he likes to do, he said, I like to shoot. He said, I like to play under the basket. I do what the coaches expect. He said, I can adapt. I mostly like to shoot, but I can do other things also. I asked him about expectations, and he said he's not expecting a whole lot playing time the first year. And he said if he gets minutes, he'll try to use them. He said, I'd like to put on muscle and get stronger. He said, I'd like to improve because I still feel like I can improve a lot. I told him, I said, that pretty big dude already. Like, the thought of you putting on even more was kind of impressive. And he laughed. He got a good kick out of that. He was a really engaging interview. His English was great. I didn't get a chance. I meant to ask him like when he learned English and how long he learned or how long he's been speaking it, but he seemed like a natural English speaker. I watched his teammates, interacting with him and joking with him. He seemed like just kind of one of the dudes already. As I was talking to him and players were kind of passing, going to the locker room and then going up to workouts. Some of them were joking with him and making faces behind me, Devin Royal in particular. So he just seemed like he fit in pretty easily so far. He'd only been at Ohio State. I believe today will be 2 weeks to the day that he arrived on campus. He did credit associate head coach Joel Justice for really helping with the whole process. Justice was the coach who primarily recruited him and helped sign him. He also said that, Jake Diebler spoke to him, called him a lot. He said a lot of his teammates had been messaging him, welcoming him to Ohio State. So he said he felt comfortable, like right away. Essentially, he felt like he had a base at Ohio State, and this is a guy he had never been to the United States before. I'm always fascinated by that stuff too. And when I covered the Columbus Crew, I was always interested the players that they would sign from the international players. So what experience they had in the United States, what kind of visits they had maybe made or games they had played. Yvonne said he's never been here before, never been to certainly Ohio or Columbus, but the United States, period. Now, what will help, I think, with some of that transition is the fact that he has extensive experience being away from home for long periods of time with his national team. So this is not necessarily a new deal for him. He's comfortable and familiar with being away. He did say it's about a 19-hour trip to get from his home in Croatia to get to the United States. It's a 6-hour time difference. It took him 3 flights to get from home to Columbus. So he's on campus. He's getting acclimated, and like I said, I can confirm, big dude, very big dude. So that story has already posted to dispatch.com. The one that I will be writing next is about Quez Glover, and I did speak with Quez's high school coach. His name's Jeremy Parrott, in Knoxville at Bearden High School. I believe that was it off the top of my head here. But the interesting thing about Quez's story to me, well, there's a couple parts, but one is the fact that he started, or he went through high school rather, determined to earn a high major scholarship offer, and according to his coach, he said he had like 28 mid-major offers all throughout like his junior year through his senior year. He said he started to pick up recruiting momentum like at the end of his junior year. Like Loyola Chicago offered him like as like Sister Jean, all that was going on. But he said that he really was betting on himself and trying to earn a high major offer. And that senior season ended with a state title game. He was MVP of the state tournament. And after the title game, Coach Jeremy Parrott said that he got a call from an assistant coach at Florida. Within a few hours, Mike White was on a plane to go watch him play in some open gym and do some workouts. And he ended up getting a scholarship offer and committing the next day. So the offer came. He committed on April 1st, which he said he had people assuming that it was a joke, but it wasn't. He committed to Florida on April 1st, and then spent 2 years with the Gators before transferring to Samford. So that's the first of several moves along the way here. And it turns out there was a connection to Samford. Samford was coached by Bucky McMillan, who coached at Mountain Brook High School in Alabama. And while he was in high school, Quez Glover played in a National Hoop Fest event in Mississippi and played against McMillan's team, scored like 36 that night. They lost by 1 or 2, Jeremy Parrott said. But he said that made it pretty easy for him to fit in and build a rapport with Bucky McMillan. So then he goes to BYU after 2 years at Samford. I was only there for a short amount of time. And this is where I was really interested to talk to him, because when you look at BYU's coach, Mark Pope at the time, and then you look at Kansas State coach Jerome Tang, both had really positive things to say. And it's very interesting in the transfer portal era how different coaches may or may not handle or want to talk about former players, guys that are transferring out, or guys, a lot of times you don't even see guys really, or coaches really saying a whole lot about the circumstances that led a player to transfer in. There's a lot of sort of ambiguity in all of this right now, and a real reluctance to get into the weeds of things too much. But in Quez's case, you had coaches on both sides saying really positive things, which was interesting to me. Because you would think that, a coach that signed a player and had him for a couple of weeks during the summer and then lost him might feel a certain way. And so I asked Quez, like, what was it that happened at BYU? And he said it was a great situation. If I could go back, I probably would have chose BYU again. Coach Pope, he's a great guy and has great staff. They had a good vision and they believed in me. I believed in what they were doing. If I could go back, I wouldn't do anything different. With BYU, it just didn't work out with some of the things that were said during the recruiting process. Other than that, everything was good. So when he left Samford, he had a couple of options. BYU obviously among them. Matt Painter was recruiting him, and he had a visit planned to Purdue, and he had a planned visit to Memphis and Tennessee. So the week after the portal opened, when he was planning to go to Purdue and Tennessee that week, or excuse me, Purdue and Memphis that week, Purdue got a commitment from Lance Jones. So that took him out of the running to go to Purdue. And then Memphis, they also signed somebody else. So that visit got canceled. So his decision came down to Tennessee and BYU. So he ends up at Kansas State, and he had been injured at the end, or like throughout his final season at Samford. He was dealing with a knee situation. So I asked him, like what was that year essentially like for you at Kansas State? And he said he felt really prepared. He said I was coming off an injury, so that was in the back of my mind. But mentally, I felt prepared with practices and learning from the Samford staff. He said he wasn't worried about the skill or anything because he was obviously going back to the high major level. So 2 years at Florida, playing time dipped as a sophomore. So he transfers back down to the mid-major level at Samford, performs really well there, and then transfers back up. So what is that transition like going back to the high major? And he said he wasn't worried about it. He said when it came to his time at Kansas State, he said it was a lot of ups and downs. He said he came to Kansas State 100% healthy, and he did practice with BYU and stuff during the summer. He said, and then I tore my meniscus in the exhibition game. He said I came back, I was playing well in the exhibition game, came back, was playing well in the exhibition game. He said probably 7 minutes in, my knee locked up on me. I went and looked at it, and it was partially torn meniscus. He said it was about 6 to 8 weeks he was out. He was coming back right before conference play, and the day before game, he tore it again. So he missed the rest of the season, ended up taking a medical year. And at the end of the season, ultimately leaves Kansas State. So I said, what was it about leaving Kansas State? Like, did you think you were going to stay? He said, I didn't really have any aspirations of leaving. I wanted to stay there. It just didn't work out that way. We had to part ways, and it was best for me to enter the portal. So I did not know that he was a player in the portal when Ohio State started recruiting him. And it was certainly a pickup that surprising. I don't know. It's unique because you're talking about a player who missed all of last season, split time with two programs, and then suddenly was back and available and is in the transfer portal. So I said, what was it, or how did Ohio State then kind of pop up on the radar? Like, where did this come from? And he said, I just know, he said he was getting his hair cut, and he got a phone call from Jake Diebler. And he actually said, I thought he was still at Vanderbilt. He said, I didn't know he got the head coaching job because I still had his number saved as Jake Diebler, Vanderbilt. He said it was probably late May sometime. And when it comes to what it was about Ohio State, he said he believed in what they had coming in. He said, I knew the guys they had coming in, and Coach Diebler alluded to the fact there was a need for me and that I could have a pretty good role on this team. I believed in what their vision was, and I was going to dive head in like I do every other situation. I asked what other schools were recruiting you this year, and he said Tennessee, Villanova, Virginia Tech, and a few high majors. He did say he's fully healthy. He's competing, playing with guys, pickup, going through weights, competing, going through weights, lifting weights, going through practices. He said it's good to be out there playing again. He said he realizes it's a little weird that he's the new guy again. He said, I've been the new guy for 2 years back to back. He said, He's got to take, what he learned from the other schools. Um, so people will see a lot of energy from him, a lot of pace. He kind of described himself as being able to do everything. He said a lot of energy, a lot of pace, speed, ability to score the ball at all three levels, defense, getting my teammates involved. He did say that South Carolina had been recruiting him when he left Samford to join the Gamecocks and play with Michie. So he knew a little bit about Michie, but otherwise doesn't have ties with anybody on the Ohio State roster. Um, and seems like he understands at least what the role or what the expectation is, and that he's joining a backcourt with Michie Johnson and Bruce Thornton and Micah Parrish, and Tayson Chapman was going to be in that rotation, and he's essentially trying to fill that spot. So it will be interesting. I think the immediate comparison in my mind, I'm curious, how does he ultimately compare to either Dale Bonner, who was brought in to be, a backup and a complementary player last season, and Cedric Russell, who was a late addition when Dwayne Washington stayed in the draft and was transferring up. Quez has not played a game against a high major opponent in quite some time. So there is going to be some acclimation there. And yes, he has 2 years at the high major level. It's been a couple years since then. So I'm very interested to see how he fits in, and is he capable of holding down a 5 to 10 minute a game role, and is he accepting of that? I mean, that's certainly, you're talking about a guy who is in his 6th year of college basketball. That can be a tough ask in some ways. So, but it was a really, really good interview, really easy guy to talk to, again, much like Yvonne. And I'll have a full story on all this here midweek next week. Obviously, this being the holiday weekend, there's kind of a lot going on. So yeah, look for it sometime midweek next week. Now, I do want to point out, I said on a prior podcast that there was just one number 6 prior to Quez Glover. Well, credit to Gary Pettit, the SID for the men's basketball program, because he did send over a more complete list. I had mentioned on a previous podcast that Mike Knapp, one of the biggest Ohio State basketball fans that I know, he was pretty sure there were a few more than what I had come up with. I'd mentioned a Donald G. Kelly, who wore number 6 from 1954 to 56. We totally missed on a big name, Richard Schnitker. He wore number 6 from 1948 to 50. The year after him, William C. Wilkes wore it in 1951. And going back even farther, Richard T. Baker wore number 6 from 1937 to 1939. So yes, there have been a couple number 6s, but it has been decades since anybody has worn number 6 for the Ohio State men's basketball program. So that'll be an interesting look for sure. Other thing that's worth pointing out right now is that Darryn Peterson, the top three prospect in the 2025 class, arguably the biggest recruit from Northeast Ohio, or from Ohio period, since LeBron. He is taking his official visit to Ohio State. Now, he's been on campus multiple times. He has certainly a level of familiarity and comfort with the Ohio State coaching staff, which has been recruiting him for years at this point. And it is worth noting that he was being recruited by Chris Holtmann and his staff. And now with Jake Diebler in charge, he's still taking this official visit. So the Buckeyes are one of his top 8 schools that he announced. I do think Ohio State, from the people that I've spoken with, is legitimately in the running on this. One of the things that I think will be a key factor when it comes to his recruitment and where he ultimately decides to play college basketball is going to be how much a program can maybe showcase him. How much can he be a face? Because he's a one and done, potentially, even in an era where you want veteran players. There's always a couple outliers to that where you can have freshmen who can immediately move the needle, and all the recruiting people that I speak with insist that he is one of those types of players. So is he the kind of guy that could potentially push Ohio State across the line to a Final Four or something like that? Like there's a real belief he is that talented. Now he's got other big blue blood schools recruiting him heavily. And I know Coach Cal at Arkansas has been recruiting him heavily to Kentucky. Bill Self is really prioritizing him at Kansas. It will be an interesting recruitment, but I do believe there's an opportunity for Ohio State here, and it would certainly be a game-changing type of commitment for Ohio State. I mean, the likes of which, he might be the highest-rated recruit in Ohio State history, or at least perhaps dating back to Greg Oden. You go back and you look at it. Jared Sullinger was the number 3 player in his class. Darryn Peterson is number 3 in this class. D'Angelo Russell wasn't rated quite as highly, but obviously turned out to be really a good basketball player. So big visit this weekend for Ohio State. We'll see what comes of that and what ends up coming next for Darryn Peterson. But wanted to put that on your radar as well. And the last thing to get into here very briefly is that as I record this, I am an hour and a half away from the pre-sale opening for Oasis tickets. And obviously this is something that if you've been following the podcast or you know me at all, you know how big of a deal this is. So there's I have a lot of anxiety right now about whether or not this is going to happen. I've never seen the band overseas. There's always a bucket list thing for me to get to go to England, to go to the UK and get to see Oasis. And that never happened. And I never thought it would. And now in an hour and a half, I'll be in an online queue trying to get tickets for July 4th next summer when the band plays its first gig together, back together in Wales. Never been to Wales. Don't know how I'll get there. Don't know any other details other than I've got my fingers crossed. I'm obviously repping the shirt. I've been repping Oasis shirts all week. It's been an incredible week from that regard. So very excited about that. I'll certainly whatever happens, it will not be a secret. So go listen to some Oasis. It's a good day. It's a good day. It's a good week to get into all that. It's 30th anniversary of Definitely Maybe after all. So yeah, go give it a spin. So I'm going to end this one here. As always, you can send along your questions, your comments, your love notes, your hate mail, and otherwise constructive criticism to me at Adam Jardy on Twitter or ajardydispatch.com. Thanks again for listening. Thanks to Scott Kirk for handling this one in the midst of a really busy day at the Dispatch. I'll be back with you probably mid to late week next week. So until then, be kind, take care, and we'll talk soon.